worship. And for us, worship requires several things. So several things. We looked at the example of Abraham and Isaac. Abraham worshipped by sacrificing his son, going to sacrifice his son Isaac. And we said that ingredients that are required for worship is, first of all, you need to have something to worship. What I found out as I looked at it is, we don't all worship God, but we worship something. And Abraham, as we looked at Abraham's worship, we found out that the first thing that Abraham worshiped was God himself. And God, the way that God told him to worship him. In other words, come up with his own worship. If you remember back in Genesis, when Cain and Abel brought their worship, it says that God had, but he didn't have respect for Cain's worship. And it is believed respect for Cain's worship because Cain brought God what he wanted him to have. And when we worship God, we sometimes think that we can worship this. We determine when we worship and when we haven't worshiped. And God showed us last week that no, worship starts with God, what he considers to be worship. And if you're not doing it the way he said, he wants it done worship. We also realized in looking at Abraham's advice, if you're going to truly worship God, it should cost you. If it doesn't cost you anything, then it's probably not worship. If you're giving God what you don't want, if you're giving God, have left over after you take care of yourself. In other words, you didn't put him first, and if you hadn't had nothing left over, he wouldn't have gotten nothing. And the only thing is because you had it left over. And many of us that approach God in our giving. When we come to worship before God, a lot of times we don't put him first. And we say, God, well, if I got in there over, care you. And we know that, we don't want that. We don't want us. We don't want people, putting us on the back burner and treating us as resort or, giving us, their leftovers. Giving us their leftovers, then why would we want to give God ours? Notice that true worship requires sacrifice. It should cost you something. And if it doesn't cost you something, then it's probably. We also saw that from Abraham's sacrifice of Isaac, that worship often requires separation. What that means is worship is really between just you. I mean, there's nothing wrong with being in corporate worship. There's nothing wrong with being in the congregation. But when it really comes down to it, between you and God. And if you're truly going to worship him, then you get him as your main focus. You need to make sure that he's the reason why you worship. He is the person that you're worshiping. And so you can be in the crowd and as long as you separate yourself from the crowd. Meaning you don't care what other people are doing. You come to worship God because you're going to put him first. And because you put him you know, the person next to you can be asleep. You know, that ain't got nothing to do with you and God, and that has nothing to do with relationship with God. And so if you're gonna worship Him, you know, you don't want to do before you decide if you're going to worship, or wait to see how they're going to decide that you're going to either join in or do your own thing. It requires separation. It means that you're going to separate yourself from those that are around you. So that separation by telling the two men that were with him, the two servants that were with him, while me and the boy go yonder and worship themselves from those that were serving him, so that he wanted to make sure that they didn't, you know, try to stop him, because you know their master was, so was Isaac, and chances are they wouldn't Abraham slay, kill Isaac, and so Abraham understanding that if he's gonna be able to worship God in spirit and in truth, he's gonna have to separate from those that will come along with him. And likewise, you might have to separate yourself from some people, because there are those that they don't take all that. There are going to be those that are going to tell you that you're not going to be those that are going to try to tell you that you're doing more than what you're doing is not worship. You know, and if you're not careful, you'll start and take your eyes off of the Lord. And when you take your eyes off of the Lord, you'll find ending your worship, and you'll find yourself, doing what everybody else is doing. And worship, of course, requires self-denial. In order for Abraham to be willing to slay Isaac, he had to deny himself. God told him, he said, take your son, the one that you love. And so if Abraham, for him to kill Isaac, he would have to, do not what he wanted to do, God wanted him to do. He would have to deny himself in order to be obedient. And so likewise, sacrifice requires self-denial. And we can't worship properly because we have too much pride. If I start worshiping like I know to worship, then they're gonna look down on worshiping the way I know to worship, or I feel like God is leading me to worship. Then they're gonna start looking at me in such a way that I'm gonna be, and so I'm gonna be ostracized, and as a result, I'm gonna lose my little, with my brothers and sisters. And I live right now, I don't want to mess up my reputation. They think I'm pretty righteous. They think that I try to live right and I try to do right, and I'm a man that stands up for right. And if they see for the Lord, I'm gonna lose a whole lot of credibility. So I'm gonna myself and giving worship to God, and many times and what we call worship, in reality, really isn't worship. It shows at the end of it that worship usually ends in when Abraham took Isaac up, and Abraham was getting ready to God stepped in and said, don't kill the boy. I see now you love me. In fact, you love me more than you love him. And that worship was satisfactory to God. And what I'm trying to get you, again, if you're going to worship him, you got to give him worship that he's looking for, the worship that satisfies him. In the Old Testament, you find God telling the children of Israel, I hate when y'all come together with worship. Y'all lives are so messed up before you come to worship. You're living any kind of thing. You even got idols that you're worshiping during the week. But then the Sabbath temple or come to the synagogue and you want to say that you're offering up a. He says, I don't need your bulls and your rams. He says, I'm not. And he says, the bull and the ram was more, because I was using the blood to cover up your sins. He says, but you ain't bringing enough bulls to cover up all the sins you all are committing doing. And he got to the point where he said, you stay home. About you, if you stayed home, I would feel better about you if you didn't come to worship. If God doesn't sometimes look down on us and say, boy, that worship, I wish that I'd rather they stayed home. That false worship and that fake worship. But Abraham satisfied, and because he satisfied God, he showed us what true worship looks like. Satisfying God. This is not really true worship. But look for a few minutes at what worship is. We talked last the law, the principle of first mention. That when a word is found in the Bible, whatever it means the first time you see it, is usually what it's going to mean to see it. And so a lot of times we look at, we look at the Bible and we read passages about, what this passage mean? Well, if that's not the first time that word has been mentioned, you just get back and find out what the first time it was mentioned and what it meant then and what was going on in that. And you can apply it to whatever scripture that you read. And we saw worship was mentioned again last week was when Abraham was told to go up his son. And he said in verse 5 to the men, you all stay here while me and up yonder to worship. And so that's how we get an idea of what true worship is like. And so we're gonna try to get an idea of definition, if you would, of what worship is. And what we find out about, you can break it down to two words, worth and ship means to be a part of, or to be in, and worth means, what is something. And I was talking to someone a couple of weeks ago, and they were talking about they started training camp, and they was talking about how much money these players, and they were saying they make too much money, and my you worth what they pay you. If they pay you $22 million, if anybody gonna give you $22 million, if they and so what I was trying to get them to understand and realize, the person that's doing the paying is the one that determines the worth. I mean, you see a car that you like, and they tell you what the price is. You decide what they're asking. If you think that the price is fair and that it's worth what they ask, drive it off the lot. If you think they're asking too much, you get in your car and drive home back. Whatever you got there, get in somebody else's car if they brought you, and you base what the car is worth by what you're willing to pay. And it's the same way when we start talking about God. When we start talking about worth, how much is God worth to you? And when you come to worship, the question you need to ask yourself is, what is God? And if he's not worth anything to you, then you come and you sit down and look around. and you balance your checkbook. You ain't worth nothing to you. Whatever you decide that you're going to do. But if he is worth something to you, then you make him your focus. And if he's not worth anything to you, you make the trip out here. Why come to worship and not worship? I mean, on the natural side of life, you go to the job, you to work. And if you ain't going to work, then why you show up? And a good boss is going to tell you ain't got to come tomorrow. That you're not planning on working. You just coming to collect the paycheck. So if you're going to come to worship, we need to come to worship with the idea of, and that word worship, when I was looking at it in John 4, God, that they that worship God must worship him in spirit and in truth. Word is defined as kissing the hand. And those of you have watched the old movies, so if they came into the presence of him, he'd extend his hand and the person would reach out and kiss. And all that meant was that when you was kissing the king's hand, he was superior to you. And even today, you find bowing down to the queen, and she extends her hand, and they are acknowledging that she is superior. That's what the word worship means. It means that you are bowing down or willing to give up on that's greater than you. Someone that's superior to you. Willing to bow down, then you're saying, hey, you ain't no better than I am. We've seen people like that. We've seen people say, hey, he one leg at a time, just like I do. And which is true, but in life you have people at different stations, with different levels of honor. And so we need to understand when we're talking about giving God the worship, let's do him. And so how willing am I to give God worship? To bow down to him. How willing am I to say that, Lord, you are greater than I am? And that's why we say when you come to church, if you just stop and think about if you just stop and think about what he's done for you just in the past week, to come and be thankful. You have reason to come and praise. You have reason to come and worship. And so we need to understand how important worship. And one of the things we need to understand about worship is worship starts in the heart. Part of worship is and David said it many times, over or boiling over of your spirit. And that's how awesome God is. And the fact that he's so awesome. And he says, what is man that you are mindful of him? And we can give him a temple. And God says, I don't want you. He says, but because you were willing to build me a temple, I'm going to make your name great. You will always have someone or descendant on the throne. David sat down and he thought about that. He's like, who am I? Honor on me. Who am I that God would care that much about me? Bless me in such a way. And that's the same question. Me. Who am I that he would keep me? Who am I that I deserve in me? And the very fact that Not enough of me. So because of, but in spite of. You know, that's a good reason. That's a good reason to lift him up. That's a good reason to put him first. So he tells us that if you're going to worship him, you need to worship him in spirit, but you don't need no hypocritical worship. You don't need no false worship. You don't. When you enter into his gates, you enter into his gates with thanksgiving. You enter, you're thankful unto him, and you're blessing his name. And Psalm 100 goes on good. His mercy is everlasting, and his truth endureth to all generations. The fact that he's good. When you think that his mercy is everlasting, when you think that it's true, that's another reason to worship him. Again, our worship, the person that's inferior, give honor to the one that's. And if God is superior to you, then you worship. If he's not, then you don't. It's really, and so we need to stop and understand just how, because we need to realize that, as I said in the beginning, we all worship something. You know, didn't want to come tonight because our car was going to get wet. You know, we have, some of us worship our home. Some of us worship, we have other things that we have put in front of God. And if you put worship in that, instead of worshiping God. And so John MacArthur tells the story of she was in the kitchen cooking, and she got up and when she looked in the skillet at the tortilla, it looked at her like Jesus tortilla. So she took the tortilla out the skillet and he said, "Yeah, I guess it got like Jesus." And she took the tortilla to the priest for him to bless it, and the priest about how the tortilla had changed her heart, how the tortilla changed her. This is the face of Jesus, and her husband said, "Yeah, she's been a lot more loving since tortilla. She's been a lot kinder and sweeter to me, and a lot. She's been joyful all the time." And the priest said, "Well, I have nothing, but I'll go ahead and bless your tortilla." So he blessed the tortilla, put it in a glass, and put some cotton, get hurt, and spread the word around. I got Jesus on it. And she said, over the next few weeks, about 8,000 people showed up here with the face of Jesus, and everybody showed up. See, it looks like what we think Jesus looks like. I mean, nobody's ever paint a picture of him when he was here, so we don't really know what he looks like. But she convinced others that Jesus was in that tortilla. The only person that didn't see Jesus in the tortilla was a reporter. He came along and he said it looked like Leon speaks to him. But the people were willing to worship a tortilla because that was their idea of what Jesus would look like if he was with them. And likewise, when we worship a lot of times, we worship we worship our idea of God. We worship our idea of Jesus in spirit and in truth. Worship him for who he is, not just for what he. And so as we go through this series on worship, let us understand and realize we're called to worship. And because we have been called to worship, if we're going to worship, make sure we know what it is. Looking at this, looking at these verses and doing this research is slightly off in my idea of what worship is. There's a good chance that some of you all might be a little off in your idea. But if you're going to worship, we need to find out what worship is and truly worship. As Jesus said in John 4:24, we can hear it and be in truth. We hope something has been said tonight. Be an encouragement to each and every one of us. As I said, at worship, we all worship something. But if you call yourself a Christian, you should be worshiping is your Lord and Savior, Jesus Christ. Stop now and take up our offering.